The emergency signal came through at Oro 300 hours, cutting through the silence of the horizon's end like a knife. Captain Jiwon Park was already awake, staring at the star charts in her quarters when the alert flashed across her screen. She moved quickly to the bridge, her boots echoing in the empty corridors of the sleeping ship. The message was weak, fragmented, but unmistakable. A planet called Velara was dying. Its people were being consumed by something they called the Gray Rot, a plague that turned living tissue to ash within days. The signal begged for help, for medicine, for anything. It had been broadcasting for 3 weeks. Jiwon pulled up the Galactic Communications Network and found what she was looking for. The Galactic Council had received the same distress call. They had debated for exactly 4 hours before making their decision. Quarantine, no aid, no intervention. The vote had been unanimous. She read through the Council's reasoning with growing disgust. The Velarans had no military strength, no valuable resources, no strategic importance. Helping them would require massive resources with no return on investment. The risk of the plague spreading was too high. The other species offered their thoughts and prayers, then moved on to other business. By 0400 hours, Jiwon had assembled her senior crew in the briefing room. Dr. Hyunwoo Choi arrived first, his medical bag still slung over his shoulder from the night shift in the med bay. Engineer Mirai Kim came next, wiping grease from her hands. Navigator Daeho Shin was last, carrying a mug of coffee and looking confused about the early morning summons. Jiwon didn't waste time with pleasantries. She played the distress signal. The voice that came through was soft, musical, and desperate. It spoke in broken standard, the universal language of the galaxy. The speaker described cities going dark, children dying in their parents' arms, hospitals overflowing with the sick and dying. The Velarans had tried everything. Nothing worked. They were running out of time. When the message ended, silence filled the room. Hyunwoo was the first to speak. "How far away are they?" "6 days at maximum speed," Jiwon replied. "We're the closest human vessel by 2 months." "The council said no?" Mirai pointed out, though her voice lacked conviction. "That means Earth Command will say no too. We'd be violating quarantine protocols. They could court-martial us." "They could," Jiwon agreed. "But I'm not asking Earth Command. I'm asking you. Show of hands. Who wants to help?" Hyunwoo's hand went up immediately. Daeho hesitated for only a moment before raising his. Mirai looked at each of them, then at the star chart showing Velara's location. She cursed softly in Korean and raised her hand too. "This is going to cost us everything," she said. "Probably," Jiwon agreed. "But I've been reading about the Velarans. They're empaths. They feel the emotions of everything around them. They have bioluminescent skin that glows with their feelings. They've never fought a war because they physically cannot handle the pain of hurting others, and now they're dying, and nobody cares because they have nothing to trade. The galaxy is full of species that suffer," Daeho said quietly. "We can't save everyone." "No," Jiwon agreed, "but we can save them, and if we don't, nobody will." The horizon's end changed course 3 hours later. Jiwon sent a message to Earth Command explaining their decision. She didn't ask for permission. She simply informed them that her crew was exercising their right to respond to a distress call under the space emergency protocols. It was a technicality, and everyone knew it. The protocols were meant for ships in immediate danger, not planets under quarantine. The response from Earth Command came 2 days later. It was exactly what Jiwon expected. "Return to your previous course immediately. You are in violation of Galactic Council regulations. Any assistance to Velara will result in severe diplomatic consequences for Earth. This is a direct order." Jiwon deleted the message and kept flying. The crew worked around the clock to prepare. Hyunwoo converted the cargo bay into a mobile hospital, pulling every piece of medical equipment they had. Mirai reinforced the environmental seals and installed extra air filtration systems in case the plague was airborne. Deho plotted 3 different escape routes in case they needed to leave quickly. On the 4th day, they received a transmission from the Galactic Council itself. A counselor appeared on screen, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish made of crystal. Its voice was cold and mechanical through the translator. Human Vessel Horizon's End. You are in violation of Council Decree 2847. Turn back immediately or face sanctions against your entire species. Jiwon faced the camera squarely. With respect, Counselor, we're responding to a distress call. That's what decent people do. The Valorans are beyond saving. You will only spread the contagion and waste resources. Your emotional response is clouding your judgment. This is why humanity is not yet ready for full council membership. Maybe we're not ready, Jiwon said. Or maybe the council isn't ready for us. Either way, we're going to Valara. Horizon's End out. She cut the transmission before the counselor could respond. Mireille whistled low. Well, we're definitely getting court-martialed now. Add it to the list, Jiwon said. On the 6th day, Valara appeared on their sensors. The planet was beautiful from orbit, covered in continents that glowed with soft blue and purple light. But as they got closer, Jiwon could see the darkness spreading. Entire regions that should have been glowing were going black. Cities were dying. Life signs? She asked. Deho worked his console, then went very still. Captain, when that distress call was sent 3 weeks ago, there were 8 million Valarans on the planet. Now I'm reading less than 2 million. 6 million dead in 3 weeks. The number hit Jiwon like a physical blow. Hyunwoo closed his eyes and whispered something that might have been a prayer. Get us down there, Jiwon ordered, near their capital city, and broadcast on all frequencies that we're here to help. The Horizon's End descended through Valara's atmosphere. Through the viewports, they could see abandoned cities, their bioluminescent architecture flickering like dying stars. Forests that should have been alive with color stood gray and lifeless. They landed near a cluster of structures that Deho identified as quarantine shelters. As the ship settled onto the ground, Jiwon saw figures emerging from the buildings. The Valarans were humanoid but taller, thinner, with skin that pulsed with faint light. Most of them glowed so dimly that Jiwon could barely see the colors. They moved slowly, like people who had forgotten what hope felt like. One Valaran stepped forward from the others. She was slightly taller, and her light was a deep amber color that flickered with surprise and disbelief. When she spoke, her voice came through the ship's external speakers, soft and musical even through the translator. You came. Someone actually came. Jiwon activated her own microphone. My name is Captain Jiwon Park. We're from Earth. We're here to help. The Velaran's light brightened slightly, shifting toward gold. I am Ambassador Elira. We thought the galaxy had forgotten us. They did, Jiwon said honestly. But we remembered. The air outside smelled wrong. Even through the environmental suits, Dr. Hyunwoo Choi could detect something off about Valara's atmosphere. It wasn't the plague itself. His scanners confirmed that much. It was the smell of decay, of a world slowly dying. He stepped down the loading ramp behind Captain Jiwon, carrying his medical kit and trying not to stare at the Valarans gathered before them. They were beautiful in a heartbreaking way. Their skin glowed with soft colors, pulsing gently like breathing light. But the colors were all wrong. Instead of the vibrant blues and purples he'd seen in the historical files, these Valarans glowed in sickly yellows and dim grays. Some barely glowed at all. Ambassador Elira led them through the quarantine shelter. The building had once been some kind of community center, but now it held hundreds of sick and dying Valarans. They lay on makeshift beds, their lights flickering irregularly. Some held hands with family members. Others lay alone, their skin turning ashen at the edges. The gray rot starts in the extremities, Elira explained as they walked. Her voice was calm, but her light pulsed with deep sadness. First, the fingers and toes turn gray, then the color spreads inward. When it reaches the heart, death comes within hours. We've tried every treatment we know. Nothing slows it down. Hyunwoo knelt beside a young Velaran, barely more than a child by their standards. The kid's hands were completely gray, and the color was creeping up the forearms. The child looked up at him with eyes that glowed faintly purple, and Hyunwoo felt something wash over him. It wasn't physical. It was emotion, pure and direct. Fear, pain, curiosity about the strange alien with the dark skin and round eyes. "They're empaths," Elira said softly. "We feel what others feel. It's how we communicate deeper than words. Right now, this child is asking if you can help." Hyunwoo swallowed hard and pulled out his medical scanner. "I'm going to try. I promise I'm going to try." He spent the next 6 hours taking samples, running tests, and reviewing data. Mirai set up portable generators to keep the medical equipment running, while Daiho coordinated supply distribution. Jiwon moved through the shelter, talking to Valarans, learning their stories, promising them that help had arrived. By nightfall, Hyunwoo had his first findings. He gathered the crew in a corner of the shelter, away from Valaran ears. "It's not a natural plague," he said without preamble. "It's a bioweapon, centuries old but definitely engineered. The molecular structure is too perfect, too specifically targeted at Velaran biology." "Who would do this?" Mirai asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "The Krell Dominion," Jiwon said flatly. "I pulled up the historical records. 300 years ago, the Krell and another species fought a war near this sector. Valara got caught in the middle. The Krell used bioweapons against their enemies, and one must have contaminated Valara's ecosystem. It stayed dormant all this time." "Until recent seismic activity released it from underground," Daiho added. "I checked the geological surveys. Valara had major earthquakes 6 months ago, right before the first cases appeared." Hyunwoo nodded. "The weapon was designed to lie dormant in soil and water, then activate under specific conditions. It targets the Valarans' empathic biology. Their emotional connections actually make the disease spread faster. When they feel fear and pain from others, it weakens their immune response. It's a death spiral." "The Council knew," Jiwon said quietly. "They knew it was a bioweapon, and they still did nothing." "Collateral damage from an old war," Mirai said bitterly. "Not worth the political trouble of confronting the Krell." "Then we work around them," Jiwon decided. "Hyunwoo, what do you need?" "Time. Samples. And honestly, I'm not sure human medicine can fix this. We're dealing with a completely different biology. I need to understand how their empathic system works before I can even begin developing a treatment." The breakthrough came 3 days later, but at a terrible cost. 2 human volunteers from the engineering crew, young techs named Yunji and Sang-woo, had been working directly with sick Valarans to set up better ventilation. They hadn't worn their helmets for 10 minutes, claiming the equipment was interfering with their work. By evening, both were showing symptoms. Not the gray rot exactly, but something close. A mutated strain that could cross species barriers. Their hands were turning gray at the fingertips, spreading slowly but steadily upward. Hyunwoo isolated them immediately, but the damage was done. The crew was shaken. They'd known the risks intellectually, but seeing their own people infected made it real in a way nothing else could. What happened next surprised everyone. Ambassador Elira and a dozen other Valarans approached the isolation unit where Unji and Sang-woo lay. The Valarans were sick themselves, their own lights dim and flickering, but they stood outside the transparent walls and closed their eyes. Their lights began to pulse in synchronization, creating a wave of soft amber color. Hyunwoo watched his monitors in amazement as the 2 humans' vital signs stabilized. The gray color stopped spreading, It didn't reverse, but it stopped. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Sharing their burden," Illyra said, her voice strained. "Emotions can hurt, but they can also heal. We're giving them our calm, our hope, our strength. It won't cure them, but it will slow the disease." "You're killing yourselves," Hyunwoo protested. "You're too weak for this." "They came to save us," Illyra said simply. "Now we save them. It's what decent beings do." Her words were an echo of what Jiwon had said to the council, and they hit Hyunwoo like a hammer. These people were dying, abandoned by the galaxy, and they were using their last strength to help humans they'd known for less than a week. He worked through the night with renewed determination. If the Valarans could find strength in their darkest hour, so could he. The breakthrough came at dawn. Hyunwoo ran into the main area where Jiwon was trying to sleep on a makeshift cot and shook her awake. "I've got something. It's crazy, but it might work." He pulled up his data on a portable screen. "Human immune systems are incredibly aggressive. We evolved fighting off thousands of different diseases on Earth. Our antibodies are generalists, designed to attack anything that looks foreign. Valaran immune systems are specialists, precise but fragile." "Can we use that?" Jiwon asked, instantly alert. "Maybe. I ran some tests on the samples from Yunji and Sang-woo. Human antibodies are actually attacking the gray rot. Not well enough to cure it, but they're fighting back. If I can synthesize a treatment using human immune components, modified for Valaran biology, it might work." "What do you need?" "Blood. Lots of it. From every human on this ship. And I need to test on volunteers because this could go very wrong very quickly." Jiwon didn't hesitate. "Take mine first." Within an hour, every human on the horizon's end was lined up in the medbay, rolling up their sleeves. Mireille joked about feeling lightheaded but refused to stop after one donation. Daeho gave until Hyunwoo physically pulled the needle out of his arm. The crew gave everything they had. The first test subject was a Velaron volunteer named Kieran, whose gray had spread to his shoulders. Hyunwoo injected the synthesized treatment and watched the monitors with held breath. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then the gray color stopped spreading. Then, impossibly, it began to recede. Slowly, painfully slowly, the healthy skin color returned, millimeter by millimeter. Kieran's light blazed bright gold, and every Valaran in the shelter felt his joy and hope wash over them like a wave. "It works," Hyunwoo whispered. "By everything that's holy, it actually works." But as he ran the calculations for mass production, his hope dimmed. They could save hundreds, maybe thousands, but there were still over 1 million infected Valarans on the planet. The horizon's end didn't have the resources to manufacture enough cure for everyone. They needed help, real help, on a massive scale, and the only ones who could provide it had already said no. The message from Earth Command arrived during the 3rd week. Jiwon read it alone in her quarters, watching the recorded face of Admiral Ko deliver the news with bureaucratic efficiency. Earth was facing sanctions from the Galactic Council, trade agreements were being threatened, diplomatic relationships were straining. 3 council members had formally demanded that humanity be expelled from consideration for full membership. The pressure was mounting, and Earth Command was ordering the Horizon's End to return immediately. Jiwon deleted the message and went back to work. They had saved 3,000 Valarans so far. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like barely making a dent in an ocean of suffering. Every day, more Valarans died while Hyunwoo's team worked frantically to produce more doses of the cure. They'd named it Illyra's Gift, after the ambassador who had first welcomed them. The problem was simple and insurmountable. The Horizon's End was an exploration vessel, not a mobile pharmaceutical factory. They could produce maybe 50 doses per day, working at absolute maximum capacity. Meanwhile, thousands of new infections appeared daily as the plague spread through the remaining population. Hyunwoo had lost weight. his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. Mireille was running on stimulants and sheer stubbornness, keeping the production equipment running through constant breakdowns. Deho coordinated distribution, trying to get doses to the areas with the highest survival chances. The math was brutal and heartbreaking. "We're losing," Mireille said one night as she and Jiwan stood outside the shelter, looking up at Valara's twin moons. "For every person we save, 5 more die. We need help." "Earth Command won't send it," Jiwan said. "They're more worried about politics than people." "Then we go around them." Jiwan looked at her friend, seeing the determination in her grease-stained face. "What are you suggesting?" "Remember what you said to the council about decent people responding to distress calls. Say it again, but this time, say it to everyone." The broadcast went live 6 hours later. Jiwan stood in front of a camera while Deho routed the signal through every available communications channel. She didn't address governments or councils. She spoke directly to people. "My name is Captain Jiwan Park. I'm speaking to you from Valara, a planet most of you have never heard of. 3 weeks ago, we came here in response to a distress call. We found a civilization dying from a plague that the Galactic Council decided wasn't worth saving. We've been working ever since to keep these people alive." She paused, gesturing to the shelter behind her where Velerons moved through the dimly glowing corridors. "There are 37 humans on this ship. We've donated our blood until we can barely stand. We've worked without sleep until we collapse. We've done everything we can. And it's not enough. We can save thousands, but there are over 1 million Velerans who need help. We don't have the resources. We're not asking Earth Command or the Council anymore. We're asking you." Jiwan looked directly into the camera, her exhaustion and determination clear on her face. "If you believe that no one should die alone and forgotten, if you think the galaxy should be better than this, then help us. We need medical supplies, manufacturing equipment, doctors, engineers, anyone willing to make a difference. The Council says the Valarans aren't worth saving. I say they're wrong, and I'm betting that some of you think so too." The response was chaos. Earth Command was furious, sending threatening messages that Jiwan ignored. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to condemn the broadcast as inflammatory and dangerous. Several species lodged formal complaints about humans interfering in galactic politics. But something else happened too. Ships started arriving. The first was a civilian transport called Rising Dawn, captained by a grizzled old woman who introduced herself as Lee Bora. She'd been a colony ship captain before retirement and heard Jiwan's broadcast while visiting Earth. She'd loaded her ship with medical supplies purchased with her retirement savings and made the jump to Valara within 3 days. "Figured someone should show these council folks how things are supposed to work," she said when she landed. "Where do you need me?" More ships followed. Independent traders, private medical vessels, even a few corporate ships whose crews had mutinied against their orders to stay away. They came from Earth colonies, from human stations, from anywhere humans had heard the call and decided to answer. The most important arrival came 5 days after the broadcast. Captain Soman Lee of the medical frigate Mercy dropped out of hyperspace with a crew of 40 medical specialists and enough equipment to set up a proper pharmaceutical production facility. Somin was everything Jiwan wasn't. Organized where Jiwan was impulsive, calculating where Jiwan was emotional. They clashed immediately over logistics and strategy. But Somin had brought something invaluable, a virologist named Dr. Taeyang Han, who took one look at Hyunwoo's work and started making improvements. "You've been working miracles with nothing," Taeyang said, reviewing the production setup. "But we can do better. Give me 3 days and I can triple your output." 2 days, Somin said flatly. "People are dying." 2 days, Taeyang agreed. The expanded operation transformed Lumenis from a desperate last stand into something resembling organized medical relief. Somin set up triage centers, routing the sickest patients to Dr. Ara Yoon, a trauma surgeon who performed miracles with Valaran physiology despite never having treated their species before. But success brought new problems. The Galactic Council, embarrassed by humanity's accomplishment and shamed by their own inaction, announced they were sending a relief mission. The news broadcast showed council representatives claiming credit for organizing the humanitarian response, conveniently forgetting their earlier refusal to help. Jiwon watched the announcement with growing anger. When the council ship arrived in orbit and requested landing permission, she denied it. "Tell them we're full," she told Deho. "Captain, that's a direct refusal of a council vessel. That's practically an act of war." "Then let them start one. They want to help? They can wait their turn behind everyone who was actually willing to risk something." The standoff made galactic news. The council demanded landing rights. Jiwon refused. Finally, the council sent a direct communication demanding to speak with her. The counselor on screen was the same crystal jellyfish that had threatened her weeks ago. Its voice was cold with barely controlled fury. "Captain Park, you are creating a diplomatic incident. Stand down and allow our relief mission to proceed." "With respect, Counselor, we don't need your relief mission. We needed it 3 weeks ago when you said no." "We needed it when 6 million Valarans died while you debated politics. We needed it when you threatened sanctions instead of sending help. Now, we're managing fine without you." "You cannot refuse a council directive." "Watch me. You want to help? Actually help? Then admit you were wrong. Admit you let people die because it was politically convenient. Admit that you only care now because humans made you look bad. Do that, and maybe we'll talk." She cut the transmission before the counselor could respond. Behind her, Somin whistled low. "That's going to have consequences." "Everything has consequences," Jiwon said tiredly. "At least this one I can live with." The consequences came faster than expected. Earth Command recalled every human vessel in the sector, ordering them to withdraw from Valara immediately. Somin's ship was specifically named, along with threats of court-martial for her entire crew. That night, Somin called a meeting of all the human captains. 19 ships had gathered at Valara, ranging from massive medical frigates to tiny personal transports. Their captains crowded into the Mercy's briefing room, waiting to hear what Somin would decide. "Earth Command wants us gone," Somin said without preamble. "They're threatening our careers, our ships, everything. Anyone who wants to leave has my complete understanding and no judgment." Silence filled the room. Then old Captain Bora stood up, leaning heavily on her cane. "I'm 73 years old. They want to court-martial me? Let them try. I'll die before I leave people to suffer because some politicians are scared." One by one, the other captains stood. Not a single person left. Somin looked at them all, then at Jiwon. For the first time, something like respect showed in her eyes. "Then we stay, and we finish what we started." But in orbit above Valara, sensors detected something new. Ships were approaching, big ones, with weapon signatures that made Deho's blood run cold. The Krell Dominion had arrived, and they weren't happy. The Krell ships appeared on the scanners like dark stains against the stars. 12 massive warships, each one capable of glassing a planet from orbit. They arranged themselves in a blockade formation, cutting off any escape routes from Valara. Daiho's hands shook as he read the sensor data. "Captain, those are military vessels. Heavy weapons, full battle configuration. They're not here for negotiations." Jiwon stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through options that all ended badly. The human ships were medical vessels and transports, completely unarmed except for basic defensive systems. Against the Krell Armada, they would last maybe 10 minutes in a fight. The communication came through in Krell battle language, translated by the computer into flat, emotionless standard. Human vessels, you are ordered to withdraw from Valara immediately. This planet falls under Krell historical jurisdiction. Your interference is noted and will be punished. Historical jurisdiction. A fancy way of saying the planet had been in their territory 3 centuries ago when they'd poisoned it with bioweapons. Jiwan felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce. They caused this, Mireille said quietly beside her. The plague, the deaths, all of it was their weapon. And now they're claiming ownership. What do we do? Deho asked, his voice small. Before Jiwan could answer, another transmission came through. This one was audio only, heavily encrypted on a private channel. The voice that spoke was human, male, and carried the weight of authority. Captain Park, this is Admiral Ko from Earth Command. I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but the Council has struck a deal with the Krell. In exchange for not attacking your ships, the Krell get to reclaim Valara. The surviving Valarans will be relocated to a Council facility. You need to evacuate now while you still can. Jiwan closed her eyes. A deal. Of course there was a deal. The Council would save face by claiming they'd negotiated a peaceful resolution. The Krell would get their historical claim validated. And the Valarans would lose their home, becoming permanent refugees on some sterile station somewhere. What about the cure? She asked. We've saved almost 50,000 people. We can save them all if we have more time. The Council doesn't care about the cure. They care about ending this situation before it starts an interstellar incident. I'm sorry, Jiwan. You did good work, but it's over. The transmission ended, leaving silence on the bridge. Jiwan looked at her crew. Mireille's jaw was set in stubborn determination. Deho looked scared, but resolute. Through the viewports, she could see the lights of Valara's cities, glowing brighter now than they had in weeks, thanks to the cure. We're not leaving, she said. Captain, Deho started. They'll kill us. Maybe, but we're not leaving. Signal the other ships. Tell them what's happening. Anyone who wants to evacuate has my blessing. But the Horizon's End stays. The response from the other captains was unanimous. Nobody left. Captain Solman's voice came through on the fleet-wide channel, calm and professional. Well, if we're going to die, we might as well die doing something worthwhile. Dr. Tae Yang, how much cure do we have stockpiled? Enough for another 100,000 doses if we work non-stop for 3 days. Then we work non-stop. All ships, maximum production. If the Krell want to kill us, they can do it while we're saving lives. The next 72 hours were the longest of Jiwan's life. The Krell ships hung in orbit like a sword waiting to fall while the human vessels worked frantically below. Every hour, the Krell commander sent another ultimatum. Every hour, Jiwan ignored it. On the surface, the operation expanded exponentially. Dr. Ara Yoon trained Velaran medical personnel in basic treatment protocols, creating teams that could administer the cure without direct human supervision. Taeyang pushed the production equipment past its safe limits, coaxing out every possible dose. Hyunwoo worked until he collapsed, then woke up and worked some more. Ambassador Alira moved through the treatment centers, her light blazing bright gold now that she'd received the cure in the 2nd week. Wherever she went, hope followed. The Valarans could feel her joy, her gratitude, her absolute certainty that the humans would not abandon them. But Alira was also sick in a way the cure couldn't fix. The gray rot had damaged her internal organs before the treatment took effect. Hyunwoo had told her privately that she had weeks, maybe a month. She'd smiled and told him that was more than enough time to see her people saved. On the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. Ships started arriving. Not human ships, not Krell ships. Ships from dozens of different species, appearing out of hyperspace in small groups. First came a Tarian medical vessel, its captain broadcasting simply, "We heard about what you're doing. We're here to help." then a Quellan transport carrying food and supplies, then a Varanian science ship with additional medical equipment. The trickle became a flood. Independent vessels from across the galaxy, inspired by the human example, defying their own governments and the Council to come to Valara. Some brought supplies, some brought expertise, some brought nothing but their presence and their willingness to stand between the humans and the Krell fleet. Within 6 hours, over 40 non-human ships had gathered at Valara. The Krell blockade suddenly found itself outnumbered. The Krell commander sent a final transmission, this time on an open channel for everyone to hear. "This is Commander Throck of the Krell Dominion. All vessels will withdraw immediately or be fired upon. We will not repeat this warning." Captain Soman surprised everyone by responding before Jiwan could. Her voice was steady, professional, and absolutely inflexible. "Commander Throck, this is Captain Soman Lee representing the humanitarian relief effort at Valara. We acknowledge your presence but cannot comply with your demands. We are engaged in life-saving medical treatment that cannot be interrupted. Any hostile action against our vessels will be recorded and transmitted to every species in the galaxy. We are within our rights under historical territorial claims." "Historical territorial claims don't override the moral obligation to preserve life," Soman countered. "Your weapons created this plague 3 centuries ago. Your people have a choice now. You can add more deaths to that legacy, or you can let us finish saving the people you endangered." The line went silent. Jiwan held her breath, watching the tactical display. The Krell ship's weapon systems were powered up, ready to fire. One command from Throck and they would all die. Then a new voice entered the conversation. It was the Crystal Jellyfish Counselor, the one who had threatened Jiwan weeks ago. "Commander Throck, the Galactic Council advises restraint. The situation has become complicated." "Complicated?" Throck's voice dripped with contempt. "The humans defied Council authority. They violated quarantine protocols. They interfered in Krell territorial space. They also saved over 100,000 lives," the counselor said, its mechanical voice carrying a strange note that might have been respect. "They inspired 40 different species to join their cause. They've broadcast their actions across the entire galactic communications network. If you fire on them now, Commander, you won't be punishing rogue humans. You'll be massacring a relief effort watched by billions of sentient beings." Another long silence. Then Throck spoke, each word sharp with fury. "The Council was supposed to handle this." "The Council miscalculated," the counselor admitted. "Stand down, Commander. This is not a battle you can win. We have superior firepower. But you don't have the moral authority. Not anymore." Jiwan watched the tactical display as, one by one, the Krell ships powered down their weapons. The blockade held position, but the immediate threat of violence faded. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. On the surface, Dr. Hyanwu administered another dose of the cure to a young Valaran child. The gray color receded, replaced by healthy, glowing skin. The child's light blazed bright blue with joy, and their parents wept with relief. Miri stood in the production facility, watching machines that shouldn't work keep running through pure stubbornness and engineering genius. They had produced 150,000 doses in 3 days. Impossible numbers, achieved through impossible effort. Deho sat at his console, monitoring the ships in orbit. Human, Valaran, and now dozens of other species, all mixed together in a defensive formation around the planet. A fleet built not on military alliance, but on the simple belief that some things were worth fighting for. And in orbit above them all, the Krell ships waited, their weapons silent, their crews grappling with the realization that they'd lost a battle without firing a shot. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. 3 months after the Horizon's end. First landed on Valara, Captain Jiwan Park stood in a field of glowing flowers and tried not to cry. The field had been dead when they arrived, nothing but gray ash and dying soil. Now it blazed with bioluminescent blooms that pulsed in waves of blue and purple, responding to the emotions of the Velorans walking through it. The gray rot was gone, completely eradicated. The final doses of the cure had been administered 2 weeks ago, and the last patient had been declared healthy 3 days ago. 400,000 Velarans had survived out of the original 8 million. The number was simultaneously a miracle and a tragedy. Ambassador Elira approached through the flowers, moving slowly. She was dying, everyone knew it. The cure had stopped the plague, but the damage to her organs was irreversible. She had maybe a week left, but her light blazed bright gold, showing no fear or regret. "Captain Park," she said, using the formal address despite Jiwan asking her repeatedly to use her first name. "The Council of Elders is ready. Will you come?" The ceremony was held in the central plaza of Lumenes, where thousands of Velorans had gathered. The humans stood awkwardly at the front, uncomfortable with the attention. Somin looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Hyunwoo kept checking his medical scanner out of habit. Mirai fidgeted with a piece of machinery in her pocket. Only old Captain Bora seemed comfortable, leaning on her cane and smiling at the crowd. Elira stood before them, flanked by the other elders. When she spoke, her words were broadcast across the planet so every Velaran could hear. For 3,000 years, the Velaran people have lived in peace. We have never raised weapons against another species. We have never sought conquest or dominion. Our gift is empathy. Our strength is compassion. And our weakness is that we cannot defend ourselves when others wish us harm. Her light pulsed with deep sadness, and every Velaran felt the echo of centuries of vulnerability. 3 months ago, when plague threatened our extinction, we called to the galaxy for help. The great powers debated and decided we were not worth saving. The ancient species offered sympathy but no aid. We prepared to die, believing we would be forgotten before our lights even faded. She turned to face the humans directly. Then came the humans, a species barely known to the galaxy, with no obligation to us, with nothing to gain from helping. They came anyway. They gave their blood until they could barely stand. They worked without sleep until they collapsed. They defied their own government, risked war with the Krell, and refused to leave even when threatened with death. Elira's light shifted to pure gold, so bright it was almost blinding. The humans showed us that the galaxy is not as empty as we feared. They proved that compassion exists beyond our species, that courage means doing what's right even when the cost is high, and that true strength comes not from weapons, but from the willingness to sacrifice for strangers. She gestured, and other elders came forward carrying simple metal bands that glowed with embedded Velaran crystal. They placed the bands on each human's wrist, where they adhered to the skin and began pulsing in rhythm with the wearer's heartbeat. "By the ancient rights of our people, we name you Lightbringers. These bands carry a piece of Velara's light. Wherever you go, whatever you do, you carry our gratitude and our friendship. You are forever welcome on our world. Our children will sing songs of you. Our history will remember you. And our hearts will always hold you as family." The plaza erupted in light as thousands of Velarans let their emotions shine. Waves of gold and blue washed over the humans, and even without Velaran empathy, they could feel the gratitude, the love, the pure joy radiating from the crowd. Jiwan found herself crying despite her best efforts. Hyunwoo was openly weeping. Even Somin's eyes were wet. Mirai tried to hide her face, but her shoulders shook. Old Captain Bora just smiled like she'd known this was coming all along. After the ceremony, the real work began. The Velarans offered humanity a permanent alliance. In exchange for continued protection and support, they shared their empathic technology, biological knowledge, and unique understanding of emotional resonance. Scientists from both species began collaborative projects that would revolutionize everything from medicine to communications. But the story might have ended there, with simple cooperation and mutual benefit, if the Krell hadn't made one final mistake. Daiho picked up the sensor readings first. 6 Krell warships breaking from the blockade, weapons powering up, on an attack vector toward Valara's surface. "They're targeting the capital!" he shouted. "Impact in 3 minutes!" Jiwan ran for the command center, her mind already calculating impossible odds. The human ships were unarmed. The relief vessels from other species had minimal defenses. They couldn't stop 6 warships. But something else happened. Ships appeared. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They dropped out of hyperspace in waves, surrounding Valara in a defensive formation. Tarian cruisers, Quellan defense platforms, Varanian interceptors. Species from across the galaxy, arriving to defend the world they'd helped save. And on every communication channel, the same message played. Not from governments or military commanders, but from civilian crews, independent captains, ordinary people who had watched the humans' example and decided the galaxy needed to change. "This is Captain Rhynar of the Tarian ship Compassion. The Krell will not harm Valara. This is the Quellan defense platform Unity. We stand with the Velarans. This is Captain Vex of Varanus. Not one more death, not today." The Krell ships halted, suddenly facing a fleet that outnumbered them 20-1. These weren't military vessels with coordinated tactics and unified command. They were merchants and scientists, doctors and engineers, people with no business in a space battle. But they were there, and they weren't backing down. Commander Throck sent one final transmission. It wasn't threatening this time. It was almost curious. "Captain Park, you've changed the galaxy's mind about you. Perhaps you could help me understand. Your species has nothing to gain from this. The Valarans have no resources you need, no territory you want, no military power to offer. Why sacrifice so much for people who can give you nothing in return?" Jiwan didn't hesitate. Because they needed help, and nobody else would give it. Because watching people suffer when you can do something about it is wrong. Because we'd want someone to help us if our positions were reversed. It's not complicated, Commander. It's just basic decency. Decency. Throck repeated the word like it was foreign. The Council says your species is young and naive, that you'll learn cynicism as you age. Maybe, Jiwan admitted. Or maybe we'll teach the galaxy to be less cynical instead. A long pause. Then, surprisingly, Throck laughed. It was a harsh barking sound, but it held something like respect. "Perhaps you will. Stand down, ships. The Krell Dominion withdraws its claim on Valara. Let it not be said we lack honor entirely." The Krell vessels powered down their weapons, reformed into a departure formation, and jumped to hyperspace. They left behind a galaxy that would never quite be the same. A week later, Ambassador Elira died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her family and the human crew who had saved her people. Her final light was pure gold, carrying emotions of joy, gratitude, and hope. Every Valaran on the planet felt her passing, and their collective grief lit up the night sky like a second sun. They held her funeral in the flower field, where she'd spent her last days walking among the blooms. Jiwan spoke, struggling through tears to find adequate words. She settled on simple ones. She asked if we could help. We said we'd try. She believed in us when nobody else did, and she used her last days to make sure we succeeded. Elira was the best of the Valarans, and the Valarans are the best of us all. The humans prepared to leave the following week. The Horizon's End had been away from Earth for 4 months, and duties called them home. Court-martial proceedings awaited. Probably disgrace, possibly imprisonment. None of them cared. On their last night on Valara, Hyunwoo sat with a group of young Valarans he'd treated in the first days of the plague. They glowed with health now, their lights bright and strong. One of them, the child whose fear he'd felt that first day, pressed a small crystal into his hand. for remembering us," the child said. "I could never forget you," Hyunwoo replied honestly. Mireille walked through the production facility one last time, running her hands over equipment she'd kept running through sheer force of will. Valaran engineers followed her, taking notes, learning the jury-rigged solutions that had saved their world. Deho stood at his navigation console and plotted the course home. The ship felt different now, marked by their journey in ways both visible and invisible. They were going back to face consequences, but they were going back changed. Soman found Ji-won on the observation deck, watching Valara's lights. The two captains had clashed repeatedly during the operation, but respect had grown between them. "They're going to court-martial us," Somin said matter-of-factly. "Probably," Ji-won agreed. "Was it worth it?" Ji-won looked at the planet below, glowing with life that shouldn't exist. 400,000 people who were alive because a crew of 37 humans had decided rules mattered less than lives. "Yes," she said simply. "Every single second." The Horizon's End departed the next morning, along with the Mercy and the other human vessels. The Valarans gathered in their thousands to watch them go, their lights creating patterns of gratitude against the sky. Other species' ships remained, helping with reconstruction, forming bonds that would last generations. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Valara behind, none of them knew what consequences awaited on Earth. They didn't know that their actions had inspired protests across dozens worlds, demanding the Galactic Council reform its policies. They didn't know that humanity would be offered full council membership within a year, specifically because of their demonstrated moral courage. They only knew that they'd done the right thing, regardless of cost. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help someone who has nothing to offer in return. That compassion isn't weakness. It's the foundation of true civilization. And across the galaxy, in homes and ships and stations, people watched recordings of the humans on Valara and asked themselves a question they'd never considered before. What if we could be better than we are? The answer, slowly but surely, began to change everything.